So this is the review that's posted in the module. So it was on your to-do list, but you don't need to turn it in. There was a comment in the assignment that said do not submit to Canvas. So I already had given you all of the answers. Now, if you notice on question number 3 here, just to bring to your attention, this is how you might get a question on the test where you're given like this, and they're going to ask you to complete the square and then turn it into what's on the second page, turn it into this. So that might be a good question to practice for completing the square. Now, because the questions are multiple choice, the question might say, given this equation, find the focus point. So when you did the homework, they had asked you to find the focus point, find the vertex, graph it. Because it's multiple choice, you may not need to find all the components. So just look to see what the question is expecting you to answer from each question. Does that make sense? All right, so these are all in the module. These are all good ways to practice for the test. And it has all the work. This was the page 930 and 931 problems. And now I just want to get all this on the video. So let's say here on, say, number 35. So you were given this, and let's say they said find the focus points, and maybe that's all they're asking you to find. So then you wouldn't have to take time and do this and do this. You would just focus on whatever they're asking for. So when you did this in the homework, you had to do everything because you also had to graph it. Again, like on this one, you had to graph it. So on this test, because it's multiple choice, make sure you read it and only look for what they're asking you to find. Don't waste time finding everything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Also, another question: what lesson is going to be mainly on the test?
I don't know. I didn't really pay attention to that. I noticed there was a lot of parabola stuff because there's a completing the square. And that might be kind of challenging because it was so long ago. But I think it's probably pretty much equally spaced out. I don't know if it'll be 4 questions of each from each lesson. I'm not sure. But just be able to do all of it. Here, these are all the work. Again, it's in the module. It's the last thing in the module. Let's see. So you'll be given equations and asked to find components of. So like, for example, well, these are writing equations. Like find a vertex or a focus. If it's an ellipsis, they may ask you to find the co-vertices. Or they may be even asking you to match the graph with the equation given. Or you might be given pieces, like a vertex and a focus, and they'll ask you to find the equation. So just be very comfortable with all the different ways to work with these. So let me go ahead now and let me outline each of the lessons for you. Okay, so let's go through each one. So first we're going to talk about section 10.1. And again, 10.1 was a long time ago. And that was the lesson on parabolas. We spent 3 days on this. The first day that we did was we learned about the different forms of the equation. We learned how to find the focus, the directrix, the axis of symmetry, finding additional points, and then graphing it in day 1. Then day 2 was completing the square, and then day 3 we're writing equations. So your first step, whenever you're working with the parabolas, is your first step is going to be to isolate the square term. And what I mean by that is, let's say we have 8x squared equals y. We want to get the x squared term by itself. And remember, what we would do is go like this. So your first step is always to isolate the square term. You want the coefficient to be a 1. Okay, once we do that, then these were the two formats that we saw when our vertex was at 0, 0. And the first one was x squared equals 4py. And then the other one was y squared equals 4px. These are the two equations in standard form when your vertex is at 0, 0. Now, just to review what they look like, whenever it's the x squared, we would have the upside down u and the right side up u. Remember, when it's the n looking thing or the upside down u, your 4p term is negative. Over here, when it's the u shape, this number that's in front of your non-squared variable will be positive. Over here, for the y squared, when it'll be the c or the backwards c. And some words that you saw for this, you saw words that said open up, open down, things like that. So here, when it's the backwards c or opening left, your 4p is the negative, and 4p is positive when it's the letter c. So these are the two different things you would see. Now, for here, let's go ahead and talk about the different things that you would need to graph or find when we were working with these. So you would have to find the vertex, but for both of these, the vertex is always at the origin whenever you have these two formats. You would also need to find the focus point, your directrix equation. So this is a point, the focus, and the other one's an equation. You're also going to be finding the axis of symmetry. And then you're also going to be putting on an additional point. And remember, we would use the axis of symmetry to get the third point. Now, in order to find this order pair for the focus and this equation for the directrix, we need to find the p-value. Because remember, your p-value is the distance that the vertex is from the focus and your directrix. So the p-value tells you how far away is your focus point from the vertex and how far away is the directrix. Remember, your focus point is always inside the parabolas. So the green is the focus point. And then the directrix was always on the back side. So then the red would be the directrix here. So these would be key things that will help you when you're expected to come up with an equation. So let's say they gave you the focus and the directrix. Remember, that vertex is going to be right in the middle. So if you had to come up with an order pair for the vertex. Now, when your vertex was not at the origin, then we had these forms of the equation. Then we had x minus h squared equals 4p y minus k, or we had y minus k squared equals 4p x minus h. So this would be for this one, except for now our vertex is at the order pair h and k. And then this would look like the u and the upside down u. So now our vertex is here. Again, remember, when you pull it out of these equations, it's backwards of what you think. So if it's looking like a minus something, then really what went in there was a plus sign. Pretty good on that? All right, so now, let's see. For your axis of symmetry, just a little, I guess, hint or something that might help you. For the axis of symmetry, it's always going to be whatever letter is the non-squared variable. So in this case, my axis of symmetry would be y equals whatever number it is. And in this case, it's going to be a 0 because it's at the origin. Over here, the non-squared variable for my axis of symmetry would be x equals. So just little hints here. All right, now let's do day 2. So day 2 of the notes, that was completing the square. So what you can do is refer back to that review. For example, number 3 in the review is a completing the square problem. There may be other ones, but you will have to complete the square. The only difference is we're gonna not make you show, do it as an upload question. It'll be a multiple choice, but you still should have the work on your scratch paper that you're gonna turn in. Then day 3 of the parabolas was writing equations. And this is where you were given different parts of your parabola, maybe an ordered pair that was on the parabola and a vertex, or maybe a vertex and a focus, or a focus and a directrix, different parts. So what I had recommended when I taught it was draw a picture for yourself. Get yourself a visual so that way you'll know which way your parabola is opening, up, down, left, or right. Again, look for keywords in this to see if it says it opens up, it opens left, if it's symmetrical about the x-axis, different things like that. So your key thing to look for when you're writing the equations is you need to find the p-value. So if they give you a focus and a vertex, you could either, once it's graphed, you could just count the spaces. If they give you a directrix and a focus, you know that vertex needs to be right in the middle there. So again, drawing a picture, graphing the points or the equation, if it's a directrix, will give you a visual and it'll help you figure out which one of these that you're going to be using, depending on which way it opens. So again, you can review those day 3 notes. Now for day 10-2. Any other questions? That was the lesson on ellipses. So 10.2, that was the ellipses. So again, what we need to do here is when our center, now instead of a vertex being our H and K, now the H and K is going to be called our center point. So for the equations when the center is at the origin, we're going to have either x squared over a squared plus y squared over b squared equals 1, or you could have x squared over b squared plus y squared over a squared equals 1. Key thing to remember is we need to fix the equation because it always has to equal 1. So this has to be a 1 here. If it's not, we need to divide to fix it in the correct form before we can begin. For the ellipsis, the a squared is always the bigger number. So for the ellipsis, the x squared and the y squared they stay in the same spot. What moves is the a squared and the b squared. And the way that you can tell which one is which is the a squared is always the bigger number. Now, if you recall, before we had learned hyperbolas, we didn't know that there was a difference. But when we're talking about the equation of the ellipsis, the equation has the plus sign. Remember the hyperbolas, the equation has the minus sign. So this is a key difference. Now, we also learned the equation c squared equals a squared minus b squared. So for the ellipsis, this formula has the minus sign. So again, little things to remember. Now, the bigger number, which is always the a squared tells us the major axis. So wherever the bigger number is, so the bigger number, whichever variable that bigger number is under, that's our major axis. So up here, see my a squared, which is always the bigger number. My major axis for this one is going to be the x-axis, or you could also say that it's horizontal. So when I go to graph my ellipse, it would be longer this way. The b squared tells me my minor axis. Okay, over here, notice the a squared, which is the bigger number. This is going to tell me that my y-axis is major, or you could say that it's vertical. Pretty good on that so far? All right, so if I were to draw it, let me go ahead and give you guys a graph. So then your graph would look like this. Your oval shape would be longer up and down or vertically. All right, so this formula here, the c squared is going to help us find the focus points, or the foci. Remember, your foci are always on the major axis. So the a squared, once we square root it and get our a value, we're going to be adding and subtracting this a value to the center, and that's going to give us our vertices. The b squared, once I square root it, this will turn into like a plus minus. Same thing here, plus minus. We'll be adding and subtracting again to the center to get the co-vertices. Now, for this, our vertices, these are the endpoints of the major axis. The variable that we add and subtract it to is the variable that the a squared is under. So you're going to add and subtract to the variable that a squared is under. Same thing here. You're going to add and subtract the b squared to the variable that it's under. And then this is the endpoints of the minor. And then for the focus points, we're going to use the c value. And again, you're going to add and subtract to the center. And again, this is going to be on the major. So the same variable that you added for your vertices, that's where you're going to add it. Okay, let's see. So then the other one is when the center is not at the origin. So when we have a center point at HK, then we're going to be using these two formulas. X minus h squared over a squared plus y minus k squared over b squared equals 1. This one, let me zoom out. It's this scenario, so the major axis is x, because that's where the a squared is under. So in this case, to find my vertices, I would be adding and subtracting a to the x to get your, and that would give you your vertices. To get your co-vertices, you would add and subtract b to the y. And then for your foci, or focus points, you're going to add and subtract c to the same that you did for the x, for the vertices, which would be x. So then when you go to graph it, your graph for this, because it's longer x, maybe my center point is shifted over here, but then your graph might look like that. But again, notice the x is underneath the a squared, so that would tell you that it's longer this way, horizontally. The other scenario is, again, remember, x and y stay in the same spot. What moves is the a squared, b squared on this one. So this one would be vertical. So again, if you made your ellipse, let's say here's your center, then you could show that it's like this. So it'd be up and down when the a squared is under the y. So that was finding the different parts. Again, remember your focus point will be on the major axis. So like this would be a vertice. This would be a co-vertice. And then you could say you might have a focus here and a focus here. And then writing equations, which was day 2. Again, remember, draw it. Most of the time, for this, all you're filling in the final answer, you're leaving the x and the y in the equation. If it's just these two forms, the x squared over a squared plus y squared over b squared, or this one, x squared over b squared plus y squared over a squared, the only thing you're filling in is a squared and b squared. So again, that's what you're trying to find. Now you may be given the focus, and then you would have to use this formula, c squared equals a squared minus b squared. But again, the only thing you're trying to find out are these two numbers to fill in, the b squared and the a squared. Remember that, again, to just recap, a squared, when you square root it, gives you your a value. And remember, this is going to be the distance that the vertice is, or the vertices are from the center. Your b, that's the distance from the co-vertices to the center. And then if you have the foci, that'll be plus and minus c, and that's the distance that the foci are from the center. So again, you would have to probably use some form of this and then plug it in to get a squared and b squared. Now, you may also have a center that is not at 0, 0. Both of these have a center at 0, 0. But let's say your center is at HK. Then you're going to be writing your equations, filling in the H and the K, and still the A squared and the B squared. That would be the one scenario, which matches this one. And then you have the other one, again, X minus H squared. This time the B squared's under it. And then the A squared's under the Y this time. And that would match with that one. Pretty good on 10-2. All right, let's go to 10-3. So this one should be kind of fresh. These were the hyperbolas. So this time, the equation has a subtraction sign in it. And this time, the x squared and the y squared are what moves. The a squared and the b squared stay. Okay, so this time, x squared and y squared are the variables that move. A squared and b squared, they stay in the same spots. So a squared will always be under the first fraction. So the difference here, hyperbolas have a subtraction sign in the equation. Where you have the plus sign is in the c squared equals a squared plus b squared. So this one gets the plus sign. So it's like they flip between the ellipses. Now, the variable that you see first, so the variable in the numerator of your first fraction, this is going to tell you which axis it touches. So the variable in the numerator of the first fraction, this will be the axis that your graph touches. We also have asymptotes. Let me go back up here. So we also had equations of asymptotes. So when the x squared is the variable you see first, the asymptote formula or equation is y equals plus and minus b over ax. And then when the y squared is the first variable, it's y equals plus and minus a over bx. Remember, this will come into play when we're asked to write equations, and let's say one of the given is an asymptote. So again, remember, if that's the case, remember the asymptote they give you is a simplified fraction. So what we need to do is get our vertices and our focus points. So in order to get the vertices and the focus, or the foci, what we're going to be doing is adding and subtracting. We're going to be adding to get the vertices and subtracting the A, just like before, and adding and subtracting the C value. And we're always going to be adding these to the first letter we saw. And that's how we can get the ordered pairs for those. Now, the other formulas that you had were when the center was at HK. So those two equations were x minus h squared over a squared minus y minus k squared over b squared equals 1. Again, it always needs to be equal to 1. I don't know if I said that at the beginning. So just also remember up here, these always have to be set equal to 1. If not, divide and make it equal to 1 first. Same thing here. And then the other one, we're going to set it up and we're going to move the y over here. A squared stays underneath the first fraction. And then x minus h squared over b squared equals 1. We also have our formulas for the asymptotes. So y minus y1 equals plus or minus b over a, x minus x1. Remember, this is your k, this is your h, so the y1 is k, the x1 is h, and you get those from the center. Same thing here, only difference is the slope, or that number in front. y1 plus minus, now it's a over b. And again, this is k, this is h, and you get it from the center point. You also had to write equations from given. Again, draw or graph what's given to you. Give yourself a visual. So that's a little synopsis. Again, I highly recommend you go back and review the parabolas. Granted, the parabolas where it's a U and upside down U, those aren't really new to you. You probably saw them in Algebra 1, you saw them in Algebra 2. What's new to you is the format of the equation. It's a little different than what we saw at the beginning of the school year or what you saw in Algebra 1. So review all of this. Make sure that maybe you have all this set up, show the standard forms, have it on a quick reference sheet, have the asymptotes readily available. The order of this is important because if you get confused which one is A over B and which one's B over A, you may get that wrong. So you guys have a little bit of an advantage because if you were taking this in the class, you wouldn't have all of this where you could have it written down. Also remember, you've got access to your calculator with that apps button if you've learned how to use that. So just keep all of these things in mind. Any questions about anything I wrote? My advice to you is if you know your stuff, and really honestly, because it's multiple choice, there's usually 2 answers that you can get rid of that the signs are wrong. So if you already know, for example, your center point, and you know that the H always goes with X and the K always goes with Y, look for things like that because they're going to flip them and they're going to put the K with the X and they're going to put the H with the Y, and that would be automatically wrong. Then they're going to also have it where one's got a plus sign, one's got a minus sign. So again, don't put one answer on your work and then pick the other answer trying to cover both of your bases, and then if you get it wrong, you come back and say, but I had it right on my scratch. I know there's people that are going to try and say, but I was right on my work, but I know they're going to try to cover because they had it down to 50-50. So whatever answer you choose is the one that's going to get graded. So just make sure you're careful when you're picking your answers. That's where it's going to get tricky if you don't watch the order of things. Watch the letters, especially when you're doing the parabolas and they're asking you maybe to come up with the axis of symmetry. If it should have been x equals 4 and you pick y equals 4, you're going to get it wrong. So you're going to have to watch for little details. That's what's going to make this test hard. It's just going to be little teeny details, but those little details can also help you because you can eliminate the bad choices. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, granted, in the review, you had to do everything. On this test, you may only be asked to find the focus point, or you may be only asked to find a vertex and a focus or something. So it's not like you're going to have to sit there and do that half a page worth of work. Once you find whatever they're asking for, stop. Does that make sense? So because it's multiple choice, like for example, let me go back and show you the review. Go here, okay. All right, so as you're, studying and reviewing this, again, if you come to something you don't understand, you can always screenshot it, send me a question. But again, I would have, everything ready to go, for your ellipsis page or your hyperbola page like this one. I would have what the standard forms look like. I'd also have these asymptotes written down, because again, if they ask you to write an equation of an asymptote, be ready to plug in what you have if you have a center point. And then from there, you can figure it out. So just have everything, readily available. Again, vertices, you're always adding and subtracting the A value. Focus points, you're always adding and subtracting the C value. And then the only one that has co-vertices are the ellipses. And that would be using your B value, where you get from B squared. So again, remember what moves. So like in the hyperbolas, the X and the Y move. In the ellipses, it's the A and the B squared that move. Now, also remember that in your hyperbolas, A squared isn't always the biggest number. So just keep that in mind. But in the ellipsis, the A squared is always the bigger number. That's how you can tell where the A squared is located. So again, I'd go back through, read through the notes, what you took, and just become familiar with all of these 3 different conics. Because again, this chapter is really important because conics appear on the SAT. So I noticed that in the past when I've worked with students with SAT questions, a lot of students who haven't taken Algebra 2 yet, when they take the SAT, the questions that they don't know how to answer are usually the conics question, because they have enough skills from Algebra 1 to answer a lot of the algebra part of the SAT. But the part that's usually missing is this conics part. So these are important. And again, there is an apps button on your graphing calculator that has all of the equations for the conics. So I do recommend that you become familiar with your calculator for when you're taking an SAT or an ACT or a PSAT. Any other questions for me? All right, so again, study. Do lots of practice. Be able to work through this rapidly. Again, look at the answer choices. Try to eliminate bad ones. As I took one of the versions of the test, I was able to usually eliminate and get it down to 50-50. So if you know your stuff, you'll be able to do that. And that is, a good test taking strategy, is eliminating bad choices. Because some of them just have the wrong signs on the center or on the vertex, and they'll be clear to see. Any other questions? All right, so homework is to study. You don't have anything to turn in. Again, you need to watch your timer when you're taking the test, because once Canvas makes you submit that quiz and your time's up, that's it. There is no turning anything in after the fact. So you'll get the full time that's on your timer, and that's it. So just watch the timer. Pretty good? All right.
How much time will we have to complete the test?
I'm not sure if we're giving you 45 or 50. Probably 50, because it's going to be a tough test. And you'll get to see one question at a time. I think, you're not going to have time to try to be chatting with someone, because this was an easy test to make multiple questions. So there's lots of versions out there. You might find somebody that has the same question, but probably not. So I'm thinking you'll probably get the full 50 minutes, but I'll let you know when you start. It'll probably be either 45 or 50. Any other questions? All right, well, have a wonderful day. Study, and I will see you guys Wednesday. And if for some reason you're not going to be here because you're taking an AP that day, email me, let me know if you didn't tell me last week, and we'll schedule your makeup with a one-on-one Zoom call. All right, other than that, have a wonderful day, and I will see you Wednesday. Bye.
My name is Corey.
Bye.